the winter of 1884, the vast plains of Nebraska seemed like an endless white hell. The wind swept across the prairie without ceasing, like a sharp blade. It hurt both the skin and the hopes of those who had emigrated there in search of a new life. Anders Bergstrom learned that lesson the hard way. He looked at his neighbor's cabin, built according to government rules and manuals. Its interior cooled to 35 degrees Fahrenheit, even after using 8 full cords of firewood. Time would prove him right. If you like the video, subscribe. That winter, as the wind tore doors off other homes, Anders took refuge in his dugout. For years, he had noticed that the ground remained temperate even on the coldest days. He remembered his grandfather's old turf houses in Sweden, built into the hillsides. Inside, it was warm, even when there was snow outside. In those regions, people used the earth itself as protection, benefiting from its stable temperature to survive. Anders then understood something the others had missed. The land was not an adversary, but the best companion. While others cut down the few trees still growing near the river, he started digging a rectangle 5 feet deep. He carried out the excavation with almost scientific precision, guided by childhood memories and by studying old indigenous campsites on the plain. He had discovered traces of semi-subterranean homes built by the Pawnee, circular and sturdy buildings that withstood both heat and cold. That was no accident. The indigenous people had learned to coexist with the land, not fight against it. In contrast, his neighbors kept building raised shacks with floors lifted off the ground to prevent moisture. But that design only let the icy wind rush in underneath. The houses shook with every gust. Joints came apart. The chimney sucked out the heat and expelled it outside. It was like heating a wicker basket with a candle. When Anders started digging deeper, everyone came to watch. Some out of curiosity, others in mockery. John Harvey, his nearest neighbor, folded his arms and remarked, "You'll drown in mud as soon as it rains." Anders just smiled. He knew the key was not just digging for digging's sake, but understanding water movement. In Sweden, his grandfather used to say, "The secret of a house lies in its breathing. If water can come in and out, so can air and heat." Therefore, Anders started from the bottom. He brought limestone from a stream located 2 miles to the north. He broke it into fist-sized pieces and placed them as a drainage base. That would prevent water from rising by capillary action and pooling against the walls. Then, he built stone foundations, fitting each block without mortar, like pieces of a puzzle. He knew frost would crack mortar. Dry stone, on the other hand, could shift and resist, but his true ingenuity showed in the walls. Instead of wood, he used sod blocks cut from the same prairie. He extracted them in autumn, when the grass roots were strongest and interlaced like a living carpet. Each block was almost half a meter long, and he stacked them one on top of another like natural bricks. Between the outer sod wall and the inner wooden frame, he filled with soil mixed with dry grass. The result was a wall over half a meter thick, so dense it could stop the wind like a rampart. The secret lay in the thermal mass. Unlike other houses, which were light and thin, unable to retain heat, theirs acted like a living organism. During the day, they absorbed heat from the ground and at night, released it gradually. Without knowing it for certain, Anders was building a natural machine of thermal balance. While raising the walls, he designed a drainage system inspired by prairie dog burrows. He dug a trench around the house, filled it with gravel, and covered it with compacted clay. In this way, rainwater was diverted before reaching the walls. On top, he added a layer of small stones slanted outward as a shield. Thus, even in the most intense storms, water drained away from his shelter. When autumn turned colder, Anders covered 3 of the 4 walls with earth. Only the south facade remained exposed, with a door and a small window facing the sun. The rest disappeared under a bank of packed earth that rose to the roof edge. From afar, his house looked like an artificial hill, but for him it was a perfect refuge, protected from wind, fire, and cold. The settlers watched him in disbelief. How could anyone live in something like that? Some even brought their children to mock. "Look," they said, "he is building his tomb." But when January came, the laughter faded. That winter was the harshest in living memory. For several consecutive days, temperatures remained below freezing, and the wind blew with such violence across the plains that it tore off doors and knocked down fences. John Harvey kept stoking his fireplace, burning enormous amounts of firewood he had brought from the river. Despite this, ice formed inside his house and plates stuck to the table. Even by the fire, breath turned to vapor. For his part, only 3 miles away, Anders slept without feeling cold, well wrapped under blankets, with a small stove lit only during the night. The temperature in his cabin held steady at 65 degrees. Outside, the thermometer read -20 degrees. He couldn't understand it, but he sensed it. It was as if the earth breathed for him. The real secret was in the depth. Just over a meter below the surface, the ground temperature remained constant all year, near 55 degrees Fahrenheit. Anders had connected his dwelling to that uninterrupted flow. He did not need to confront nature. He had managed to use it to his advantage. During the coldest days, neighbors passed by his door. They saw the smoke emerging from his chimney, thin and low, without noise or vibrations. It gave the impression of a sleeping house, yet alive. When they entered, some did so out of curiosity or necessity. They fell silent. The atmosphere was warm, the floor solid, and there were no drafts or whistling. Only the soft crackling of wood and the scent of dry earth. Harvey refused to believe it. He had followed the instructions to the letter. Gentlemen, he had invested all his resources and energy, but his home remained frozen. What explanation was there for that Swede in his cave, living better than the rest? Anders did not boast. He only uttered a sentence. The goal is not to defeat the cold, but to coexist with it. His discovery would permanently transform the settlers' perspective on building on the plains. However, during that winter of 1885, he was still considered only the madman who lived underground. When spring arrived on the plains, the ice began to melt and mud invaded the roads. The settlers' homes began to show the ravages of winter. Cracks in the walls, roofs collapsed under the snow load, and foundations sinking into the wet ground. The men worked tirelessly to repair the damage caused by the cold. Everyone except Anders Bergstrom. His hut, half buried in the ground, remained intact. The walls, covered with a layer of grass and packed mud, showed no leakage. The drainage system operated as designed. Water was gently redirected around the perimeter, flowing through stone trenches without affecting the walls. While his neighbors were pumping water from basements or building new walls, Anders simply cleared the entrance with a shovel and watched how the March sun began to warm the interior of his dwelling. It was at that moment that many began to question. Perhaps he wasn't so crazy. Some approached pretending to ask for guidance, others just to observe up close that experiment that had defied reason. Upon entering, they experienced something inexplicable, a quiet silence, a temperate atmosphere, no drafts or humidity, solid floor, walls with no water seepage, and constant temperature even without a fire lit. "How did you keep the floor from getting wet?" Harvey asked one afternoon. "By listening to the water," Anders replied, smiling. "If you understand where it wants to go, you just have to help it." Harvey looked at him without fully understanding. For Harvey, building meant raising walls and opposing nature. For Anders, on the other hand, it meant understanding it. That summer, temperatures rose mercilessly. The wind, which had been cool, turned burning hot, and the settlers began to suffer from suffocating heat inside their huts. Harvey and his family, who shivered from cold during winter, now could barely breathe under a roof that resembled an oven. The walls captured every sun ray and retained it for hours. The warm air remained trapped inside, with no way out. In contrast, the Swede's dwelling stayed cool, as if summer could not touch it. During the hottest days, the interior temperature did not exceed 20 degrees. The same principle that protected him from the cold was the secret: thermal inertia. The thick walls of earth and grass, in direct contact with the ground, absorbed heat gradually and released it without it reaching the interior. The earth functioned like a lung, regulating temperature silently. He was content to survive and longed to perfect his creation. He learned that the orientation of the dwelling was as crucial as its structure. The southern sun could become an ally in winter and an adversary in summer. Therefore, he oriented his only main window to the south after precisely calculating the solar angle for each season. In winter, with the sun low, the rays entered directly and warmed the interior space. In summer, as the sun rose higher, the roof eaves created shade and prevented radiation from entering. It was a perfect balance, and the roof itself was a masterpiece of ingenuity. Anders had made it with hand-carved poplar logs covered with a mixture of soil and living turf. At first glance, it looked like another meadow with grass growing on its surface. However, underneath lay a system capable of regulating temperature better than any modern insulator. Between the beams, he had placed a layer of plant fibers combined with dry clay, forming a natural cushion that retained heat in winter and repelled it in summer. His grandfather in Sweden had taught him that a living house needs a roof that breathes. For that reason, between the soil and the wooden structure, Anders inserted a layer of birch bark, the same resource used by Scandinavian farmers to prevent leaks without completely sealing in moisture. This layer prevented water penetration but allowed air circulation. Thus, the roof never became damp or leaked. The settlers, those who had previously called him crazy, began to visit him with respect. Some wanted to know how to keep their homes cool. Others simply sought to understand. Anders received them cordially but told them the truth. It's not about imitating my house, but about understanding the land you inhabit. Over time, the one who had laughed at him sat by the fire in silence, without uttering a word. There was no need to talk. The proof was before them. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to subscribe. The information spread quickly. During the autumn fair, men talked about the Swedes' shelter, considered a rarity that had withstood fire, ice, and heat. Some began building small underground cellars applying his principles, while others tried to replicate parts of the design without fully understanding it. Anders, however, understood that merely copying the appearance was not enough. The essence lay in the underlying principle. The earth has its own cycle, and if you respect it, it grants you protection. During the second winter, his dwelling underwent another difficult test. The cold came earlier than expected, with snowstorms relentlessly punishing the prairies. For nearly 7 days, snow completely buried the settlers' homes. Harvey was forced to leave his home and seek refuge in the barn with his family, keeping warm thanks to the livestock's breath. Many people lost everything. Anders, on the other hand, maintained a constant temperature inside his cabin. The earthen walls acted as a protective barrier against the wind. The tiny stove, lit only a few hours a day, retained heat throughout the night. Outside, the thermometer read 30 degrees below zero. Inside the home, the temperature remained at 20 degrees, in the same quiet silence as usual. The settlers did not understand how he achieved that result. They didn't know that at that depth, the Earth maintains a constant temperature of approximately 13 degrees Celsius. Anders had simply discovered the method. Making use of resources, he had turned nature into his own heating system. After that winter, the neighbors stopped laughing. They began to inquire, observe, and imitate. Little by little, other semi-buried dwellings began to appear on the prairies, each unique, but all based on the same concept. What was once a laughingstock now represented an emblem of wisdom. Anders never sought recognition. From his perspective, his cabin was not a feat but a silent dialogue with the earth. It showed that if you pay attention, nature teaches you the art of survival. The year 1887 brought the harshest winter Nebraska had ever known. For more than 60 days, the temperature never rose above freezing. Snowstorms raged like wild animals, destroying fences, freezing wells, and crushing the hopes of the settlers who still held on. The wind seeped through the cracks, extinguished stoves, and turned the interiors of the houses into icy graves. Many settlers left their lands to preserve their lives. Others did not manage to do so in time. In that desolate landscape, Anders Bergstrom's underground dwelling seemed to belong to a different reality. From the outside, it was barely perceptible. A snowy mound, with no chimney in sight, no smoke or sound. Yet inside, a warm, constant, almost homey climate reigned. The walls maintained a stable temperature, and the fire required very little maintenance to keep burning. While the wind howled outside, his family rested peacefully. Fury. The mystery had ceased to be one, for the earth itself acted as a protector. At just 1 meter deep, the ground maintained an unchanging temperature of 13 degrees Celsius throughout the year. Anders had linked his home to that natural cycle. While other settlers fought against the environment using wood and nails, he had learned to coexist with nature. The compacted earth beneath the dwelling did not creak or shift. The thick walls, composed of layers of turf, clay, and rammed earth, gradually retained the heat from the tiny stove throughout the day. They released it at night. The roof, covered with living grass, acted as a protective barrier. The snow melted slowly on top without seeping in, and the roots kept the ground firm, preventing cracks or heat loss. That winter, the contrast between Anders' dwelling and those of his neighbors was so enormous that the rumor turned into a legend. The few settlers who managed to survive the harshest cold made their way to his door seeking shelter, and Anders welcomed each one. He offered them hot soup, blankets, and a silent lesson, and his home was a palpable demonstration that ingenuity surpasses brute force. Harvey, that neighbor who had once called him crazy, showed up one night with lips purple from the cold and cracked hands. He sat down by the fire without saying a word, while humiliation choked him more than the cold. "Don't mock me," said Anders. "I did everything the manuals said and everything the government suggested. I failed." Anders replied calmly, "You didn't fail. The notion that the land is your adversary failed." Harvey remained silent. He finally understood that the Swede had performed no magical act. He had examined. He had paid attention to the terrain, the wind, the water. He had replicated what nature always knew how to do. In spring, when the ice melted and the grass regrew, the settlers who still stood gathered to rebuild. This time, Anders was the first they consulted, not as a madman, but as an expert. He taught them how to cut turf blocks, compact the earth, and orient the dwelling to benefit from the winter sun. And to avoid the summer sun, he explained the importance of drainage, of air flowing under the floor, of the thickness of the walls. At first, some showed skepticism, but later they dared to experiment. They built semi-buried shelters, simpler, tailored to the resources and capabilities they had. With the arrival of the following winter, they realized that their new homes, although not perfect, were warmer, quieter, and more stable. The concept of the Swede, considered crazy, spread across the plains like a whisper of optimism. The county inspector also learned of the news. A man named Robert Mills went to Anders' property, where he noted observations, recorded temperatures, and calculated firewood usage. The report he submitted was compelling. The semi-buried dwelling achieved a temperature difference of more than 20 degrees compared to the outside, consuming less than half the fuel required by a conventional cabin. Within his report directed to the territorial government, he wrote, "Mr. Bergstrom's building technique demonstrates that the circumstances of the prairies require a different perspective from that of the eastern wooded areas. The ground is not a barrier, but a resource." From then on, the name Anders Bergstrom began to spread among settlers and rural designers. Few managed to say it correctly, but all understood its meaning. A shift in the way of thinking. It was no longer about opposing the environment, but collaborating with it. That summer, while others were busy rebuilding, Anders further perfected his project. He implemented a natural ventilation system modeled after the dens of plains animals. He placed tiny openings at the bottom of the south wall, sheltered from the wind, to allow fresh air in from the ground, and channels in the roof hidden under the grass so that hot air would rise by convection. Without using any mechanism, his home remained cool on hot days and warm at night. It was an ideal cycle, achieved with available materials: earth, rock, wood, grass, all from the same plains that others disparaged. Over the years, his dwelling withstood fires, storms, and tornadoes. One afternoon, a strong gale tore off the roofs of neighboring houses, but the grassy mound where Anders lived remained motionless. Its low profile and curved structure deflected the wind's energy, like a dune. It seemed that nature protected him because they shared the same language. Over time, more immigrant families began to build following his principles. Swedes, Germans, and Norwegians, each group adapted the idea according to their own style. Some used rock and mud, others mixed wood with grass. However, they all agreed on one thing: those dwellings did not require fighting the climate, since the climate itself maintained them. Anders' impact went far beyond the boundaries of his modest farm. The colonization agencies incorporated into their guides a new section dedicated to buildings designed for the prairie terrain. It was the first time the government admitted that Eastern schemes did not work in the Western region. That change, though subtle and profound, had behind it the story of an individual everyone had mocked. After overcoming the most difficult periods and the area beginning to flourish, several of the former settlers fondly recalled the old nicknames, the Swede's Cave or the Potato House, but they were no longer uttered in a mocking tone, but with admiration. That burrow had saved lives, instilled lessons, And above all, proven that inventiveness requires no permission. On one occasion, a reporter from a local newspaper interviewed him when Anders already had gray hair. He asked him what drove him to go against tradition. Anders contemplated the horizon, where the plain stretched into infinity, and he stated, "The wind pays no attention to your laments, but if you understand its language, it offers you shelter." That was all. His thought was summed up in a single sentence: collaborate with nature, do not fight it. Today, more than ever. A century later, many of those semi-subterranean dwellings still endure, hidden under grass-covered hills. Some are used as storage, others as shelters. Few people still remember the name Anders Bergstrom, yet his concept endures in every earthen wall that seems to breathe. That idea persists in every home that stays warm without requiring a huge amount of firewood. It is still present in every place where people chose to learn from the land instead of subduing it. The story of his life is not just that of a Swedish immigrant in Nebraska. It is the chronicle of how modesty can build what arrogance destroys. With his hands and great patience, a man managed to build a home that was stronger than the wind. That home possesses more wisdom than fire and offers more warmth than the sun. Every winter that strikes those lands, the descendants of those first settlers recall that lesson. Nature always prevails, but if you learn to listen to it, it will allow you to triumph together with it. Don't forget to subscribe if you enjoyed this video.